Thank you for joining today's webinar, and at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Bill.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Michelle. My name is Bill Heaven. I'm a Senior Director here at HBK, and this is our monthly risk advisory webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about securing your business and 5 that you really need to know about. And I'm joined today by three gentlemen from our MSP service here at HBK named Vertilocity. They've spoken before and they always do a really great job. So without further ado, I'm going to start moving on. This is our agenda for this morning. A few housekeeping issues that I'll take care of right now are this presentation is eligible for CPE today, but in order to get 1 hour of CPE, you have to stay online for the entire presentation, and then there's going to be 4 embedded questions that we're going to ask throughout the presentation, and you have to answer all 4 of those questions to show us that you're present for the entire presentation. The last question for CPE is just going to be a yes/no. Do you want CPE, yes or no? So answer yes, and then we'll get you a certificate in a couple days. So that's the details on CPE. We've also muted everybody's internal and their lines coming in, so we don't have any disturbances. If we do monitor the message center, so if you're having any issues, and you can still type in a message to us, and we'll monitor that way. Typically, if you are having any issues, the first thing to try is just to refresh your browser. 95% of the time, that clears everything up. We're going to plan to leave a few minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. We'll consult. If we do happen to run out of time and your question hasn't been answered, we will follow up with you by email. We're going to be sending out a link for the recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck. And I believe you can also download the slides, a PDF version through the Message Control Center. And these are our learning objectives. This is basically the 5 takeaways that you're going to get from participating in today's webinar. It's one of the things that's required for us to be able to offer CPE to our attendees. So I'm not going to bore you with reading all through them. This is my bio. I've been with HBK for 6 years now. I have a dual role. I work both in internal IT, doing IT security, as well as client-facing work out of our risk advisory practice. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's one of our guest speakers from Vertilocity, and then him and Scott are going to introduce themselves, and then we'll get kicked off with the details. So Chris, here you go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Bowman. I am the Director of Security Services for Vertilocity, the managed service provider branch of HBK. Before that, I was working for Vertical Solutions, which was acquired and brought into HBK about 3 years ago. My specializations really have been in business continuity, disaster recovery, and data center operations, and from that I've gained a pretty deep experience into the security of organizations and managing security and compliance, and so that I've been growing in that role and working right now on just launching a purely security focused practice within Vertilocity. And joining me today is my coworker, Scott Velmer. Scott, if you'd like to say a few words about yourself.
Sure. So hello, everybody. I'm Scott Velmer, as Chris had said. Security analyst at Vertilocity. Been with the company for about 7 years. Before becoming a security analyst, I used to work in the network administration role. And then before that, I used to work with elevators and robots. So a lot of fun stuff with code and reading logs. My specializations are mostly focused towards networking and administration. And now, like Chris had mentioned, getting this security role and the new MSSP stuff off the ground for Vertilocity.
Today we're going to be talking about five components, essential things you need to know about IT in order to manage a business. And the first area that we're going to be talking about is identity and access management. This is something that has grown very rapidly in importance really over the last decade, but especially since COVID-19 and the massive shift to work from home that we saw in the industry. It's really no longer, the old paradigm used to be that we would guard the perimeter of our networks and put, firewalls and web filters and all sorts of protections at the perimeter of our network to keep, what we want to protect in and keep the people that we don't want to accessing our stuff out. And that's really just not how the industry works anymore. Now we have a global workforce that, they could be working anywhere, home, coffee shop, airport, you name it, somebody's probably sitting there working, accessing company data. So it's no longer really sufficient to guard the edge. And so that's grown into this idea of identity and access management, where instead of protecting where you access the data from, we're now focused more on validating that you are the user who you say you are, determining the correct level of access to applications and data based on who you are and other conditions too, like where you're accessing it from, and then providing you that access, making it as seamless as possible to improve the user experience and to also improve security. So IAM, and I apologize, this slide is a little bit messed up, but IAM is a security framework and really does four things for you. It ensures only authorized people get access into your organization's data and your organization's applications, so it validates who they are. It then ensures access to your data only if all of the correct conditions are met. So you may have geofencing where users can only access from certain approved countries or locations. You may have risk-based analysis where hey, there's a specific time of day that the user normally accesses from, and this is outside of that, so there's going to be additional scrutiny on that access. So it validates the user, it determines that they've met all of the conditions, it provides access to the specific data and applications that user is supposed to have access to. It logs all of that information about who accessed what they accessed into a single auditable trail, and it spans across all of the applications that an organization can use. So you may have a portal in Salesforce and Office 365, and a portal here and a portal there, and a properly configured IAM can take all of those different portals and tie them all together, so a user has a single sign-on experience where they put in their credentials, meet all of the criteria, and then they don't have to deal with having a different password for every website and a different password for every portal, and have to log into this and log into that. It's a single sign-on experience, much better for the user, much more secure, and more efficient for everybody. The why of an IAM is, you're safeguarding against unauthorized access. You're preventing, really the why of it is to prevent cybercrime. The majority of cybercrime is some form of identity theft, where they're trying to obtain the credentials of a real user, impersonate that real user, get access, and either steal your property or, cause others to give up their access because they're impersonating a real user. The other big thing that a identity and access management platform does is it makes compliance much easier, because instead of having separate audit trails for every application, where one application may log some things and not others, and every application is its own separate silo, it makes a single audit trail that can be followed and makes proving compliance for any regulatory structure much easier. It also just makes employee life easier. When everybody has the right access and they have the ability to get into all of their applications, get into all of their data seamlessly, without having to have a million different logins and a million different passwords. It makes everybody's life happier and more efficient. So the way that an IAM platform works, it starts out with authentication. Typically, it's something that your username, your password, and then it's also going to look for things that you are, like biometrics, or things that you have, like a multi-factor authentication app, token generator, a passkey. Then it's going to apply conditional controls on it, on the login, based on various factors that your organization determines. Hey, this is valid for our organization. Maybe depending on the policy, it could be, well, there's certain sensitive data that we only want accessed from the office, but other information is public and we can allow that to be accessed from anywhere. So you can set conditional controls on it. You can set different applications to have different policies. You can verify that your devices are compliant. Once all of these factors are met, it provides an authorization that basically is a token that says this is the user and these are the things that that user is allowed to do. And then from that point on, it monitors what that user actually does and provides an audit trail and monitoring. And some of the more advanced security packages now take that auditing and monitoring data and they apply risk analysis to it, so that you can have real-time protection against malicious behaviors. So if somebody's getting in and suddenly changing rules in Outlook, or deleting data, or uploading data to an unusual risky IP address after they've logged in, it can even trigger security behaviors based on that. So now we're going to stop and do a CPE question. Go ahead and select your answer to what does IAM represent?
And Michelle, when you see that we've got a good representation of our audience completing that, just go ahead and flip the slide so that Chris can resume. All right, take it away, Chris.
The next component of IT security that I wanted to talk about is mobile device management. This is something that, at least in the small business space, a lot of organizations tend to avoid because there's a perception that it's very cumbersome. There's often a lot of challenges from employees saying, I don't want work controlling my phone. But the reality is that we live in we live in a world where we're connected all of the time. Almost every organization that I've dealt with has some sort of bring your own device. If not a policy, they have a de facto bring your own device experience. So, the risk, of course, with bring your own device is you now have devices that are usually unmanaged. You don't really have control over them, but now they have access into your organization's data, and they may contain your organization's data. And so the idea with mobile device management is, how does the organization exercise sufficient control over that data on the employee's device that there's not potential data loss, there's not risk to the organization, but also how do we balance that against the right of the individual employee or associate to their own data. So MDM can significantly enhance security. It can significantly improve efficiency in onboarding these devices into the organization, and it really is worth overcoming the resistance to deploy it. So MDM typically, there's four components to it. There's the device enrollment stage, which basically pairs the individual mobile device to the mobile device management platform. Mobile devices can include anything from a phone, a tablet, a laptop computer. Even desktops and mini PCs are now being considered mobile devices that are manageable through mobile device management. And the big players are even talking about really rolling it out even just to servers at this point. So, we're seeing a growth in what mobile device management is and what it can do. But it's a one-to-one relationship between a device and a mobile device management platform, and there can only be one platform managing that device. So once it's enrolled until it's unenrolled, there cannot be another MDM. Once the device is enrolled, the MDM can be configured to enforce policies. So device has to behave in certain ways. The device has to be configured in certain ways so that it is compliant with organization policy. Things like device has to be encrypted. The device has to have a screen lock with a password or biometrics, things like that provide reasonable protection to the organization's data. And ensure that should a device be lost or stolen, it's not going to place organization data at risk. Mobile device platform management platforms also include a remote wipe function. It's really important here. That remote wipe has been available for a long time for, say, smartphones and tablets, but if you just use the tools that are built into ActiveSync, which is what they use to communicate with the server, typically that's wiping the entire device. And there's some significant liability there for the organization, because you can potentially wipe out the user's personal data as well. They've got all of their personal data, their pictures, their communications on there. Which is both hugely inconvenient to the user and potentially a legal risk. So one of the benefits of MDM is that can be a granular wipe where only the company data is removed from the device, and it's removed in a verifiable way. The other component of MDM is application management. MDM can be used to deploy applications to a device when it's onboarded. So there's a single sign-on into the MDM application, and then that application is going to bring down the applications that are needed and assigned to that user, deploy them onto the phone or mobile device, and configure them according to the organization's policies and best practices. And so the purpose, of course, why we're doing this primarily is protection of organization data. Organizations have lots of sensitive data. that they need to secure just for internal operational reasons, for compliance reasons. The other benefit is, of course, it makes supporting bring your own device policies much easier. There's a much simpler process that, hey, we've got to download all of the organization apps onto your phone one at a time, configure them, make sure that you're signed in, make sure it's all working. Instead, it's a single application that's set up on the employee's device, configures everything, and make sure that the device is configured in a way that is secure and compliant. Allows those conditional access policies to be applied to the device, just like we were talking about with IAM. And it can also help keep business data separate from personal data. You can set rules that copy and paste or screenshots can only be allowed to transfer data between organization apps and not personal apps by the user. So there's a lot of benefits as far as being able to control the organization's data and maintain a level of control, even though the data is on that user's personal device. We already did that slide, so overcoming resistance is really what we've seen as the challenge of MDM. And so the process that we've seen that seems to work the best is to assign someone in leadership in the organization to be the champion of the rollout. Somebody who understands it and is seen in a leadership position that can communicate to users why this is important, and be the contact person, the champion to lead it. We've seen good success with a gradual implementation where there's a small pilot group that gets the MDM deployed to their devices first. Once it's deployed to them and they have good experiences, they'll communicate that to others, and it broadens acceptance for it to be rolled out to the entire organization, reduces user pushback. We've seen organizations offer incentives to users, maybe a financial incentive that, hey, we're requiring this on your device so that we can maintain a level of control. So we are going to give you some amount of compensation for the use of your device. That overcomes a lot of employee resistance to the idea of, I don't want work to have control of my device. And then the fourth really big thing is just explaining the impact of security and that the benefits to organizational security and also the benefits to the user from, hey, we're going to be setting this up in a way that keeps your work data separate from your personal data, so that in the event that we do separate the user from the organization, we can remove all of our organization data in a way that doesn't impact your personal data, and that usually overcomes a lot of resistance from users not wanting the organization to have that level of control. So if a company offers a bring your own device, please answer the question. They should also have
And Michelle, when we look like we've got the same approximate number from question one, then go ahead and advance the slide. And I think then Scott's taking over. Is that right, Chris?
That's correct.
All right, looks like we've got our answers whenever you're ready, Scott. All
right, let's get into some fun stuff then. So phishing and social engineering, buzzword central. What is phishing and social engineering? Why is it so popular? Why do we hear about it so frequently now in comparison to other types of cyber attacks? And then how do they use phishing? Criminals, how do they use this? So First and foremost, the what about it. It's big business, right? Feels like every year we hit a new milestone for fraud. 2023's milestone was more than $10 billion. It's a 14% increase over last year's losses of 2022. So using these kind of scams, this is the most frequent types are definitely going to be imposter scams and investment scams. So we'll jump into some statistics about three of the big ones. Marriott had a data breach for around 383 million guest records were impacted. Twitter had a VIP attack, which was around 130 high-profile Twitter accounts that were compromised due to Bitcoin scamming. That earned them over around $100,000. And then, most recently we had the LastPass data breach, which was a multi-stage attack, starting with phishing, leading up to getting employee credentials, and then being able to decrypt third-party storage vaults. So, it can spread. Phishing scams can start off very small, and they can spread very quickly, and then gain access to spread throughout your network even faster. So we'll just go over what the definition is really. Phishing, social engineering are really just methods of manipulation to either have you provide your credentials or to perform a malicious action on their behalf. Pretty simple. That's why it's so effective. You don't need any extra software, really. You don't need any extra hardware. You can just do your homework, reach out to the right people, and then put them in a state of panic or a state of urgency, and then get them to, comply with whatever you need them to do. So why would they use phishing, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can attack a system. Why phishing? The main purpose, it's to steal sensitive data, like we had mentioned. They want to gain unauthorized access, and they also want to spread malware, however they can get it. The main reason that they use this is because it has low technical barriers, and exploiting human psychology is a lot easier than getting your hands on very expensive software and or hardware. Like I had mentioned, you can leverage fear, trust, urgency, curiosity. There's a lot of different ways that you can manipulate someone into clicking on a link or, inputting a password. And then it comes down to low technical barriers. You don't really need a advanced skill set. You don't need, a wide range of tools. It really is a lot of stuff that you can gather from social media or just from investigating companies. And then lastly, it has a high return of investment. Phishing, social engineering attacks, they don't require a lot of effort. So if you don't have to have a lot of upfront investment, you can make a lot of return, on those attacks. So how's pretty interesting. It's really a tech soup kind of deal. This is where all of your terminology really comes into for social engineering that everybody's so familiar with. You have email phishing, pretexting, baiting, tailgating, spear phishing. There's a lot of different terms, but really it just comes down to the methodology of how they're implementing that attack. The terminology really just changes, based on how they're obtaining the information or how they're reaching out to the individual. And then, we can jump into some ways to protect yourself. Definitely the most effective one is going to be security awareness training. Knowing is definitely the majority of the battle here. You have to know what kind of risks to look out for. You got to know what kind of warnings, best practices, things like that to kind of keep you and your organization safe. And this is definitely something that applies in and outside of the office. Phishing has definitely it may have started in a corporate type setting, but it is, being used on just about everybody out there in the world today. Some other ways that you can fight it, you can do email filtering. You can implement a filtering solution, a block phishing emails that come before they even make it to the system. You can require multi-factor authentication or MFA. Like Chris had mentioned earlier, this requires you to have a second level of authentication. If your password were to become compromised, the malicious actor or bad actor would then need that second level of authentication to get any further. Verify and validate is absolutely huge and critical. That comes back to your security awareness and training and your best practices. It's always best practice to validate, the sender, especially if they're asking you something that seems out of the norm. If you talk to your boss once a week and then all of a sudden they're asking you out of the blue to change your billing information or change your payroll information, and your boss has never done that through email, it raises a pretty big red flag pretty quickly. So, being able to spot those and identify them quickly and then take action is key to making this work successfully.
I just want to interject there, having a policy of verification and validation, especially with large financial transactions. We've heard of and seen organizations, in the process of buying a property, they'll someone will send an email that, hey, the purchase just went through. We need you to send a $40,000 payment to this account. And they'll send it via email, and someone expecting that sort of communication just goes ahead and sends it, and it's sent from someone who's impersonating impersonating the authorizer. So it's crucial with those large transactions to have a policy and training so that users know, hey, when these large transactions happen, it has to be validated by a means other than email or text.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the next thing, which would
gift cards, right, Chris?
What's that? Oh yeah, gift cards as well. When the CEO is texting you on your personal phone number to help him buy some gift cards, that's usually a pretty big red flag.
Right. So yeah, that goes right into the incident response plan. Having a plan to deal with the incident after, after a fact or post analysis, whatever it needs to be. Having that incident response plan is definitely critical, and then adjusting it as needed. As the threat landscape changes. The other thing that kind of want to mention a little bit briefly would be, how AI is changing the landscape. It's a lot different than it was 10 years ago, in the fact that now AI can write messages and do translations for people. So, you used to have a pretty solid red flag that if, my favorite's the Nigerian prince scam. If it's coming to you and the English is broken, it looks that's a definite red flag. But now all of a sudden they can throw the same thing through a chat bot and have them translate it into perfect English, and it makes the communication look a lot more valid, looks a lot more legitimate. So you definitely want to be keeping an eye out for things like that as that progresses. Doesn't look like there's a CPE question here, so I'll just jump right into the next one, which would be backup and data recovery. What is backup data recovery? Why do we go through it? Things like that. I mean, I can give you two big examples right here. New York Stock Exchange had a daily backup. It was manual. System failed due to human error, and they lost quite a bit of data that way. And then another great example is the FAA NOTAM database. That database went down due to a file corruption in the database. They brought in contractors to try and repair the database in live time, and they caused a corruption to both copies of the data, and they ended up causing a nationwide ground stop, halting takeoff. So, you know, backups are definitely serious business at all times. And then we'll kind of jump into what makes up a VDR. So it's really 4 points. You know, you have your data backup, you have recovery point objectives, you have recovery time objectives, and you have your failover and redundancy, right? So the backup itself is the process of, you know, backing up critical data systems, you know, files, configurations, anything that you would need to get a system back off of the ground. Recovery point objectives would define how much data is acceptable to lose if you do have an incident. Recovery time objectives is how much time is allowed for, you know, what's a minimum allowable downtime for a system recovery. And then failover and redundancy is more of a catch-all term to kind of have, you know, do you have a system in place that you can put, you know, can you stand up like an additional server? Can you do some sort of failover to another geographical location, something like that, in the instance of, you know, either hardware, software, or even location failure? You know, if you have a place that gets flooded, trying to get your data center back off the ground, for example, from another geographic location that's stable. So why, I'm pretty sure the why is pretty obvious here, right? We want to make sure that the company doesn't go down in the instance of any of these sort of issues, right? You know, it protects against data loss. It protects against malicious attacks. If, you know, same thing could be said that if the system could have its own corruption, or a malicious actor could come in and set a level of corruption. You know, it can be used to restore the same exact, you know, quality. Big piece of this, again, is business continuity, right? We want to make sure there's no downtime. We want to make sure that the operations, or at least minimal operations, what we determine to be acceptable operations or limited operations, are running at all times. You know, in the instance of any sort of catastrophic failures, it reduces financial losses, you know. BDR also helps, like I said, you know, it helps with cyber attacks. You can clean systems, you can recover unaffected data, just simply rolling back time. And then how? So data backups, you know, you typically have some sort of system in place that would store or contain all of that data. You know, you would configure the system to, using your recovery point objectives to determine what, you know, is an acceptable loss or what is acceptable data that needs to be backed up. You would then, you know, configure your system, preferably automatically. You know, like we had mentioned before, automatic or manual backups are not the most reliable. So you'd want a system in place that can, you know, automatically determine or do analytics based off of the configuration and then pull in all of that data. Second piece, you know, would be your setting time. You know, you need to set an expectation of time for the systems. And then lastly, which is the most important, would be actually validating and testing your backups. Anybody can say they have a backup in place, but if you're never testing it and you're never validating that the data is actually live or true, you know, it can lead to large problems when you try to do a restore and there's actually no, you know, either you have to go back further or the data that you want is you know, corrupted for a longer period of time than what you originally thought. So you know, testing and validation, I would say, is probably the most critical piece of your backup solution, and it's often overlooked. And we'll get into some best practices. So we like to do a 3-2-1 rule. Typically you want to try and get your data. So you want to try and get 3 copies of data. You want to try and get them in 2 different locations. And then you want to make sure that one of those locations is at least geographically distinct. So, you want something on the East Coast and on the West Coast, or East Coast and in the middle of the US, something like that. Second big piece is making sure that, you have encryptions. You want to have encrypted data in rest, and you also want to make sure that if your data is in travel, you can try and encrypt it, when in transit as well. Immutability. So immutability really just means that you can't change the data until a predetermined period of time. So, the data that you back up is then protected by the system for a period of time before you're allowed to either overwrite it or make a change. Very important for backup systems. Then you want to make sure you have clear, defined a step-by-step recovery guide. So you're going to want to make that, recovery process clear. You're going to want to work through it with your IT teams and your administrative teams to make sure that, not only did you get the right recovery time objects and points, but you have the ability to, test, validate, and then reproduce the results, in any sort of instance that, you have loss. You want this to be something that's a very straightforward path to completion. You don't want, any sort of gray area when you're doing your backup recovery. It should be very well outlined. You should be able to jump, step by step, no ambiguity. And then you can take that and loop that into your incident response plan. So, once you have all those clear steps and everything is, coordinated, you would move that to, your administrative teams or your security teams, and then you could have a more coordinated approach to your cybersecurity incidents or disasters. So that way, it makes it easier to do like a post-analysis or, preventative measures for the next time around if you did run into a repeat incident. All right, and then would be our third CPE question.
Right.
So, which term represents the acceptable data loss and how frequently data should be backed up? You want to go ahead and select your answer for that one.
All right, looks like we're ready for you again, Scott.
Are you picking this one up, Chris? Or you want me to just keep going?
I'll talk about this. So the last piece that we wanted to discuss is layered endpoint protection and the idea of not having just a single solution to cybersecurity. There's lots of different ways that our devices and users are attacked by cyber criminals, so when we look at the security of an organization and an organization's data, especially at the endpoint where it might be taken out anywhere publicly, we want to make sure that there's not just one thing being protected, but we're looking at a holistic approach to protecting the entire device from multiple vectors of attack. So layered endpoint security is a comprehensive approach using multiple measures to basically just make sure that we're covering all of those vectors. We may hit some sort of malicious code from an infected email or an infected URL. Somebody may be trying to actively hack from a public network on your computer. We want to make sure that there's something addressing all of the different vectors. In the old days, we would have lots of different software. So we would have an antivirus software, an anti-malware software, a firewall, maybe a behavioral analysis, patch management, email and web filtering, device control. We're starting to see a lot of consolidation now where tools are doing multiple of these things. Some of them doing all of it, but so we've gone beyond the traditional antivirus that used to be the security solution with a computer. You'd have antivirus, and then maybe the computer has Windows firewall turned on, and maybe it doesn't. And what we're starting to see is industry-wide a shift towards what they're calling endpoint detection and response, or EDR, where components of antivirus and anti-malware and firewall and behavior analysis and device control and sometimes email and web filtering are all built into a single solution that can be centrally managed. And it's instead of just responding to definition updates of the antivirus company saw, hey, this is a new malware that's out, going to provide you the signature for that, and we'll block that if we see it. Endpoint detection and response is now looking at the behavior of what processes on your computer are doing. So if an email comes in and it starts to launch an application, well, that's a suspicious behavior, and it's going to look at the process that's happening there and then send data off to the logs, which that by itself doesn't do you a whole lot of good unless someone is looking at it. So growing out of EDR is we're seeing a combination of endpoint detection and response with security operations centers, or SOCs, where instead of just having an EDR, having an antivirus, having an EDR, now you have a managed detection and response solution. And that's all of the data coming out of that endpoint detection and response is being fed into AI that's analyzing it. It's having rules applied to it to, if you see this behavior, immediately take this action. That's, something called SOAR. And then also being placed in front of a security analyst who's looking at it and saying, okay, this is potentially malicious, this is really malicious, this is okay, and responding to it in real time or near real time, so that we start seeing vastly more rapid response to security threats. And when a security threat does happen, an expert who really knows what they're doing in cybersecurity will be taking that initial response. And if it's something that requires further escalation, that they'll reach out to the network administrator and work with them to address it on a broader scale. If it's something that's beyond just one device or something that can't be done purely by the operations team. Endpoint defense tools also are, we're starting to see a growth of things like DNS filtering, which combines with web filtering to protect you against where your device is able to go on the internet, and block malicious URLs and malicious content. We're seeing an integration with security information and event management, or SIEM, where all of the data from the entire network is being fed into a database where a security analyst can then see patterns within the network. And if there's lateral movement in a network or other suspicious behavior, that could be flagged just by noting, hey, who's doing what and how is the data flowing within the network. Also, part of the security solution now is the mobile device management, making sure that devices are configured in a compliant manner, as well as patch management systems, making sure that devices are always up to date and applications are always up to date. These are ways that we're addressing the diverse threat landscape, evolving cyber threats that no single security solution necessarily can answer entirely. You know, we're seeing a growth of that EDR combining roles and functions, but we're also still making sure that there are layers of protection beyond just the EDR, and making sure that the EDR is backed by a SOC and is truly managed, and not just something that's responding in an automated way and then waiting for user input that never happens. We're doing defense in depth, making sure that if somebody gets past one defensive barrier, there are still other defenses in place to resist them. And then we're mitigating any threats to the organization that can come from the endpoints. Some ways that we implement this, of course, the EDR, MDR, Vertilocity has a package that we focus on EDR and MDR, managed by Security Operations Center. We have DNS filtering, mobile device management, web filtering, multiple layers of security to prevent you from getting that endpoint infected. We use tools to automate and enforce regular updates of all of our systems. We do testing with our organizations, make sure that we've looked for security vulnerabilities. We do risk assessments, make sure that we're addressing known vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities, and then doing follow-up after that to make sure that things are mitigated. And then just making sure that the strategy that is in place is actually flexible and scalable to the size that the organization needs. It's a much simpler thing to secure a small organization with 10, 15 machines than it is an organization with hundreds or thousands of machines in separate locations. So making sure that whatever solution is in place is capable of scaling to that level that's needed, and the demands of the organization.
Okay, and then this is our last CPE question. So if you do want CPE, just be sure to tell us so, and we'll go from there. That should be it. Yep. Thanks, Michelle. I was going to say that should be enough time to for everybody to answer that question. So we'll move on to our wrap-up section, and we'll go into our QA session. I think we have a few minutes left here. So, Michelle, do we have any questions that came in for the guys from Vertilocity?
Yes, we did get one in. The question is, what would you consider the biggest BYOD risk to companies?
So the risk with bring your own device is, it's always maintaining the control of organization data on that user's device. So, a lot of times what we see is an organization that's, allowing a user to bring their own phone or maybe even their own computer into the environment, and they don't really have any controls on that device to make sure that the organization data is protected. And that device may or may not be encrypted. That device may or may not have anti-malware protection, that defense in depth that we talked about. And so that's why we have been directing our clients towards implementing an MDM solution, mobile device management, to make sure that whenever an employee does have their own personal device and there's organization data on it, we can ensure that that device is configured in a way that's compliant with the organization's security and compliance policies, that data is protected. So in the event of a theft or any other thing that could potentially expose that data, there are reasonable protections in place. And then also being able to isolate organization data from that personal data, because we see a lot of times that there's a struggle there with how do we keep the data that this employee has the right to access to, but how do we keep them from sharing that outside of the organization? We've seen some struggles with that, and usually MDM is the right solution to address that.
Great, thanks, Chris. Michelle, and by the way, everybody's contact information is on the screen there. So if you, after we hang up and you think of a question, you can feel free to reach out to myself, Chris, or Scott, or our mystery man, Justin, that has been online helping us out. Justin, you probably heard him talk at previous webinars. He's one of our principals at Vertilocity and very knowledgeable about cybersecurity. So any of the guys at Vertilocity would be able to help you out. Michelle, do we have any other questions, or is that it?
That was all.
Okay, great. All right, well, again, I want to especially thank the guys from Vertilocity. I think that was some great information. And, like I said, if you come up with any questions, reach out to us, reach out to them. They'll be happy to help you out. It's a big, those 5 essential things are big things to consider to keep your environment safe. And you can easily let them get away and get yourself into some big trouble. And again, I'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and I'll put a shout out for our next month's webinar, which is going to be on August 28th. Now it's going to be regarding SOC 2 reporting. So we'll be getting out those invitations in probably about the second week of August. But again, special thanks to Chris and Scott and our mystery man, Justin, for helping us out today. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and have a great day. And Michelle, thanks for your help as well. All right, so have a good day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.